I recently watched a YouTube video from a guy who compared one of his tracks played on a bunch of different formats: vinyl, reel-to-reel tape, cassette tape, Spotify, and there was differences in the sound quality, and he was interested in exploring those differences, and he concluded that vinyl had a certain warm sound characteristic, and it definitely did sound like that in his video. Now, I really do like these videos where it's not a lot of speculation and theories, he's actually just playing it and he's like, listen to it, that's how it sounds. That's great, and I like to do a similar thing myself. However, I have to disagree with his conclusion that vinyl sounds warm in a certain way. In my personal opinion, and this might sound a bit heterodox, but vinyl doesn't have a sound, in my personal opinion. And I'm going to debunk this myth that vinyl sounds a certain way by just doing the same thing. We're going to play, we're going to listen, and we're going to do the same thing. I've got some records here. All of these records I've personally mastered, so I have the original master files that we can compare to, and we're going to listen this time not just with one stylus, we're going to listen to two different types of styluses. So we have here an elliptical stylus, and we also have a spherical stylus, and we're going to listen to the differences in sound quality between the two, and especially listen to the high-end response of the two different styluses. We're also going to listen to how different tracking weights affect the sound of vinyl. We're also going to hear the difference between hardware-based RIAA equalization and software-based, and we're really going to see how vinyl doesn't have a sound. It's all about all of the different components which go into the experience of listening to vinyl. Most people know that vinyl is cut on a lathe. Now, I've spent a lot of time working in studios that cut vinyl, and when you switch back and forth between the master and the preview on the lathe, which is listening directly back to what is being cut, apart from the delay, there's very little difference between the two. It's almost indistinguishable. But of course, it's only if you're cutting in a pristine setup. Now, the lacquer gets shipped to the factory and there's a galvanic process. Now, of course, if they don't use the right amount of silver, it's not in the bath long enough, then it's not going to plate properly, and then it's not going to be a very good result. One thing that a lot of people don't know is after you've plated that, you actually have to cut the center hole again, and that is done manually. So if that's off, then you're going to get a drunk sound where it's going to be like, ooh, when you play it back. You've probably heard some of that before. The original pressing of D-Lows in the comatorium suffered from that problem, for example. And then when you actually come to press it, if the presses aren't the right temperature or the PVC isn't a good quality, then you're going to get more surface noise or you're not going to get a good result. Now, in terms of playback, by far the most important bit is the preamp. Normally, I'm not a massive preamp nerd, but when it comes to vinyl, that's where the RIAA equalization is baked in. So if you've got a weird equalization in there, it's going to sound very different to another preamp. Let's just demonstrate that now. This is a record listening to a Cambridge Audio vinyl preamp. But what we can do is just plug the turntable in directly to a mixer without that vinyl equalization, and we'll see how that sounds. That's right, it sounds really tinny and weird. So we need to apply the RIAA equalization digitally with EQ. We can just do that now and listen to how that sounds. And as you can hear, that sounds completely different. And now, of course, we can just look what one sounds closest to the original master. Now, I personally feel that the Cambridge Audio preamplifier does a great job and it sounds the closest to the original master. Just plugging it straight into the mixer and EQing it digitally isn't going to give you the same result because of the impedance at the input of the mixer, and the cartridge isn't loaded properly and it's all a mess. So we're just going to roll with the Cambridge Audio preamplifier, but bear in mind that if you have a bad preamplifier or a different preamplifier that does a different type of curve and there's a whole bunch of different types of curves, then that might influence the sound of vinyl even more than whatever influence that the electroplating process and cutting process actually had on the sound of the music. This here is Vicarious Memories by These Hidden Hands, of which I'm one half of. But before we can even listen to anything at all, we need to set the vinyl player up, and one of the first things we need to know is the tracking weight. So let's put it on 0.5 grams. So as you can hear, it just skips. We need to add more weight so that the needle stays in the groove. So what you'll find is if the tracking weight is too low, even if it doesn't skip, there'll be distortion and it won't sound good. You need a certain amount of weight to get a good sound. However, if it's too heavy, you'll get distortion as well, and you'll wear out the record and the needle excessively fast. So it's best to have it within a reasonable range, and we can hear there between 1 and 2 grams, there's not a spectacular difference between the different tracking weights. But so far we've been listening with an elliptical stylus. What is the difference between an elliptical and spherical stylus? So unless you've got a bunch of wax stuck in your ears, you'll hear that the elliptical stylus is obviously brighter than the spherical stylus. So here you can really see that the character, the sound quality, especially the detail on the top end, isn't determined by the format of vinyl, full stop. It's determined in part by the stylus. And there's many different types of stylus that you can have. These are just 2 types that I've got laying around here, but you can get really high-end ones and all different types with all different sound qualities. So we're starting to see that vinyl doesn't really have a sound. It's just what the cutting engineer wanted to do and the aberrations in the manufacturing process influencing the final result. The main thing that you can hear there is crosstalk. There is crosstalk on vinyl, so you have less lush stereo image there. You can definitely hear that the stereo image is wider on the original master than it is on the vinyl. This is these moments dismantled again by these hidden hands. So the biggest differences there are the crosstalk, especially in the bass frequencies. The panning of the bass on the original master is very apparent, very hard panned, but on the vinyl version, it's very crosstalk together, almost mono. And the surface noise, of course, in that really quiet bass bit where you've just got the bass bloops, you've got no surface noise in the original master, but you've got huge amounts of surface noise on the record because it's really exposed and isolated. So that is going to be the main characteristic sound quality difference of vinyl, the sound of vinyl. If it has a sound, it's going to be surface noise and maybe crosstalk. But you can cut stereo bass on vinyl. It's just less safe because the needle can jump out the groove. And if you want to prevent it from jumping out the groove, then you need to cut deeper, but then there's a limit to how deep you can cut because of the thickness of the lacquer, and also the electroplating process can only plate so thick. This is also a good example of how different pressing plants have different end results. We originally pressed this with a certain pressing plant that I won't name, and the surface noise was so high, the record was unlistenable in those quiet bass bloop sections. It was just ridiculously high surface noise. And then we pressed it again with another pressing plant. I think we went with Stylus in Germany, and it just sounded way better. And that's the record that you just listened to. And it still got a lot of surface noise, but what we had before was a joke. And so different pressing plants can really influence the results. This is Feedful by Samuel District, absolute classic landmark techno album. Now, I didn't master the original version, which came out, 15 years ago or something. I mastered this re-release, remastered version because they wanted a more modern rerun of this. Now, one of the members of Samuel District, Silent Servant, tragically passed away not too long ago. And since then, the price of this thing on Discogs has really gone up a lot to get one in mint condition. Silent Servant sent me this himself. But the thing is, vinyls are to be played, and I'm never going to sell this. So we're going to open it right now, and we're going to play it and listen to it. So when people say vinyl has a really warm, bassy sound or something like that, it's interesting because there the original master actually sounded warmer and bassier than the vinyl version, especially with the elliptical stylus. This is Thrash and Burn by Ariel Pink, some really early experimental stuff. So with this lo-fi mid-frequency centered material, you can't really hear a big difference between the vinyl and the digital at all. But again, the main difference that we are hearing is between the elliptical and the spherical stylus, because there's just more high-end detail in the elliptical stylus. This is I'd Rather Listen to the Bloody Birds by Strange Forces. Listening to that, it's quite obvious that on the vinyl version, the drums sound way bigger and more punchy than on the original digital master. What's happening there? Well, it's quite simple. What went to vinyl wasn't the same as what was released in terms of the original digital master. This actually happens quite a lot. I experience this a lot. Why? Because of the lead time of vinyl is so long, many months in some cases. In recent years, I think it got up to something like 9 months. So the artists just want to get the manufacturing ball rolling so that they can release it at some point. And I've lost count of how many times we'll do something, it goes to vinyl, they're happy with it at the time, and then 2 weeks later, they email me, oh yeah, I've been listening to it and I think the drums are too loud, or I think this is not right, or something, can you do this, or can you do that? And then I'll make changes to it whilst it's already been sent to vinyl. So the digital comes out and it sounds different to the vinyl. So when people say, yeah, but listen to the vinyl, it sounds so different than the digital, it's just that magic of vinyl. It's not the magic of vinyl, it's the fact that it's been changed for the digital release since it got cut to vinyl. So you could just have two different mixes. And in this case, we turned the drums down a bit and did some things to the mix. This is Return to Glory by Niki. So does vinyl have a sound? In my personal opinion, no, it doesn't, because it depends on what the cutting engineer does before he cuts it to vinyl, and it depends on the quality of the lathe, depends on how well maintained it is, and the stylus that is cutting the record, and the quality of the lacquer, and then it depends on the quality of the galvanic process and the metals that they use in that process. It depends on whether the center hole was punched accurately in the manufacturing process. It depends on the type of materials and the temperature of the press when they're actually manufacturing the vinyls themselves. It depends how the vinyl has been stored, if it's dusty, if it's clean. It depends then on the turntable, whether it is accurate or if it's got wow and flutter. It depends on the stylus, whether it's spherical or elliptical, and the quality of the stylus, whether it's worn out or whether it's new. It depends on the tracking weight on the arm of the stylus. It depends maybe even on the shape of the stylus arm, but I can't really talk about that because I haven't compared straight with S, but maybe there's a difference in sound quality there too. It also depends on the preamp and the RIAA equalization curve used in either the hardware box, or if you do that digitally somehow, it depends on the curve that you program in to listen back on. And obviously it's going to depend on your speakers and on your room when you're listening back. But removing the room and speakers out of the equation, just literally how it's coming through, it depends on a lot of things in that process. So does vinyl sound warm? No, because it could actually sound quite harsh and bright depending on the processing, especially in the cutting. Maybe the cutting engineer wants to cut a bit longer, wants to take some bass out to boost the level up, but without taking as much space on the vinyl, so wants to take a bit of bass out. So maybe it sounds a bit harsh, and when you're playing it back with an elliptical stylus, maybe it sounds a bit harsh actually. Maybe it sounds very warm because you're playing it back with a spherical stylus and a cutting engineer cut with lots of bass because it's a 45, let's say, and it's only 5 minutes long, so there's plenty of space on the vinyl, so there's lots of space for the grooves to be nice and wide with lots of bass and very loud and spherical. A stylus will give a more warm sound, so maybe it sounds very warm indeed. What about the high frequencies? Well, it depends again on the stylus, it depends on the tracking weight. There's so many things involved that you can't say that vinyl has a certain sound, because it's just not true. It's not true that vinyl sounds a certain way. The only thing that vinyl might more typically sound like, you might have like surface noise and static, because that is more characteristic of the format. But if you've got a really high quality press, or you're listening straight to a lacquer, for example, that's just been cut, there's almost none of that, and it sounds almost indistinguishable from the actual master on the computer or on the reel-to-reel master that you're cutting from. So debunked, vinyl doesn't really have a sound. It depends on too many things. YouTube claims that you're interested in watching this video.